Hi, welcome to this week's Davis Phoenix Coalition Office Hours. Office Hours is a weekly video series where we address questions from the community. We talk about issues such as inclusion. We provide resources and information about marginalized communities. If you have a question for Davis Phoenix Coalition's Office Hours, please send us an email through our website and let us know it's for office hours. We will do our best to address your question in a future series. This week, we're taking on a topic that has been controversial in our community recently, which is trans women in sports. There's a lot of disinformation about fairness and trans women and the differences in trans women's bodies and cis women's bodies. So we want to try to cut through all that with some facts and information to help you understand what issues are at stake and how transphobia in sports actually harms cisgender women. So today we're going to address a lot of assumptions about trans women in sports, and we're going to talk about why those assumptions are frequently wrong. So the first assumption that we're going to address is that men always have an advantage over cis women in sports. People think this because testosterone means that men generally are bigger and taller than women, and that they have greater muscle development, and also that they have bigger lung capacity and that their blood carries more oxygen. This could be a factor if sports were merely a question of who's bigger and stronger. But if that were the only factor in who would win in a sport or not, we wouldn't actually need competitions. We would just see who was bigger and stronger, and presumably that would just answer the question as to who's the better athlete. Not only do the bigger, stronger people not always win, but in a lot of sports, there are other considerations other than strength and size. For example, in sports such as skiing, soccer, climbing, tennis, archery, there's a lot more that goes into it. There's high hand-eye coordination. There is form. For example, in skiing, if you have really good form, that can improve your times, and it doesn't have much to do with your size or strength at all. The truth is that sports is a lot more than just who's bigger and stronger. There's considerations such as strategy. For example, in soccer, the best male soccer player in the world is Lionel Messi, who's actually smaller and shorter than the vast majority of soccer players in the world. His ability to find space on the soccer field and create chances and opportunities and take advantage of them, that's what has made him the best soccer player in the world, not his strength and size. You're going to hear a lot of examples from soccer, since that is the sport that I follow most often. Something really conspicuous about the ways that assumptions about male superiority in sports ends up not making a whole lot of sense. For example, in chess, where trans women were recently banned from taking part in all women's chess tournaments. The assumption here is that somehow testosterone is making men's brains bigger and stronger than women's, and therefore they're better able to compete at chess. Of course, that's not the case at all. Most chess tournaments actually are mixed gender, and men compete against women. But due to factors like sexism, men tend to dominate in chess, which is why women need all women tournaments in order to give themselves some space from what tends to be an all male milieu. But there's really no reason that makes scientific sense as to why trans women should be excluded from women's chess tournaments. The next assumption that we're going to take on is the assumption that the only physical differences that matter in women's sports is between cisgender women and transgender women. And this is simply not true. For example, we can talk about the physical differences between cis women, if we looked at the Women's World Cup competition between the Swedish world team and the Japanese world team. I told you I was going to talk a lot about soccer. It was really noticeable to me watching that game, the physical differences between the Swedish women, who come from a nation that produces some of the tallest people in the world, and Japan, which is a nation where both men and women tend to be a lot smaller on average than other people in the world. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that the Swedish team was going to prevail simply because they were bigger and stronger. There were a lot of other factors, including skill and coaching, strategy. There's a lot of factors that went into who was going to manage to win that tournament. It wouldn't have been interesting otherwise if we could simply know who was going to win just based on size and strength. Another really notable difference is, for example, the difference between East African runners in terms of elite runners all over the world. There's a lot of speculation as to why East African runners of both sexes tend to dominate in running competitions. There's thoughts that perhaps genetic differences in how they're built, that they tend to be long and lean without very bulky muscle mass. That means that they have good endurance, but they're not, physically, they're not particularly heavy, which helps them sustain running over long distances, as well as the fact that they raise and train at very high altitudes, which gives them an advantage in their ability to use oxygen, their body being able to work off of the more limited oxygen at higher altitudes, as well as things like economic factors, like the fact that a lot of East African nations are underdeveloped, and therefore the runners have a lot of motivation to try to break into elite sports and find a way to earn an income for their families that wouldn't be available to them otherwise. So now we get into the really hot topic of testosterone levels, and that the assumption is that the only differences in testosterone levels that are really significant are between trans and cisgender women. Actually, the question of testosterone levels emerged first among cisgender women. Approximately 1 in 10 women who will have unusually high testosterone levels. For a while, there was rulings that these women needed to take testosterone suppressing drugs in order to compete. Eventually, because this ruling was really offensive to cisgender women, it was dropped. But now it's coming to the fore again as we talk about trans women in sports. The thing is that we all have varying testosterone levels, and this is true between men and women. And yet, we only police testosterone levels when we're talking about women. So even though men can have unusually high testosterone levels, no one is testing them or checking their genitals to see whether they have higher testosterone levels than their competitors. This is really an example of unfairness when we're talking about men's sports and women's sports. And it's one where penalizing trans women can boomerang back on cisgender women in sports too. Because when we try to define narrowly who's a woman and who isn't, that's not just going to affect trans women. It's going to affect cisgender women who don't necessarily fall in that narrow band of what defines a woman either, even though they may have gotten there naturally. Finally, I'm going to talk about the assumption that all trans women go through male puberty. This has been true previously simply because kids weren't allowed to transition, and a lot of times people didn't even realize that they were trans before they hit puberty. But now that we have a more affirming culture, even though that culture is under attack, It means that increasing numbers of trans girls don't have to go through the trauma of a male puberty. Instead, they can take hormone blockers to give them time to decide what kind of puberty they want to go through. And then, if they decide that, yes, they're trans women, they want to transition and go through a female puberty, they can go straight to a female puberty without going through a male puberty at all. And so in the future, this is going to mean that fewer and fewer trans women experience any male puberty at all before they start the puberty that matches their gender identity. So, as we have discussed, even going through a male puberty doesn't guarantee that those women are going to be elite athletes. We always hear when a trans woman finishes first in a competition, but not every trans woman who enters into sports finishes first. We never hear when trans women lose their competitions, but there's still plenty of trans women who are entering into competitions and don't finish first. Because, as we've discussed, there's a lot more factors as to who is going to win in a competition other than size and strength, training, getting the right form, learning strategy, simply having the grit and mental preparedness. These are all things that are going to factor in as to whether any woman, cisgender or trans, is going to prevail in her chosen sport. Let's take a moment to talk about Lionel Messi, the greatest of all time in men's soccer. When Lionel Messi was a kid, he suffered from an endocrine disorder, which made him noticeably smaller than other boys in Argentina. That didn't affect his soccer skill, however, but his parents did want him to get hormonal treatments in order to help him grow. Because of the political instability in Argentina, Messi ended up going to Barcelona because they could guarantee a consistent regime of his hormonal treatments in order to help him grow to his current size of 5 feet 7 inches. It's really noticeable that Messi has therefore received hormonal treatments, but no one's accusing him of having an unfair advantage in soccer. Messi isn't the greatest of all time because of his intimidating size or large musculature. The things that make Messi so great has nothing to do with his hormone therapy. On the other end of the spectrum, we could talk about Brittney Griner. Brittney Griner is a cisgender woman, all 6 feet, 9 inches, and 205 pounds of her. No one's going to tell Brittney Griner that she's too tall and it's not fair for her to play basketball. That's just sports, baby.